Welcome to the UBI Podcast. This is Tyler Prochazka. I'm joined today by Peter Knight, who is going to explain his Sufficiency4Sustainability Network, where he is the webmaster and one of the researchers. And I think it's really interesting because it ties a lot of interrelated issues with the universal basic income. So excited to have Dr. Knight joining me today.
Pleasure to be with you.
So Dr. Knight, can you give the listeners a brief overview of the mission of your organization?
It's simply saying that we're exploring how changing values and policies might result in lower material use by the relatively well-off, while raising the consumption of the poor to a level sufficient to meet basic human needs on a planet with limited resources and moving toward a population of 11 billion by the end of the century. That's another 4 billion people out there that'll need to be alive, or unless we destroy them by some acts of war, famine, pestilence, or the rest.
So who has been involved with that yourself?
Well, at this point, this network is relatively small. It's very small, 33 specialists, but they're from 10 countries. The largest group's coming from Brazil with 13, in the United States with 11, and there are 5 in Europe. At present, we have some invitations outstanding. They are, for the most part, thought leaders who have associated with this network and to various degrees have participated in discussions. We are now in the process of planning a book that would try to put into a concrete and perhaps more broadly distributed some of what we're trying to achieve, which in essence is to get a discussion across 8 areas that we've identified that we can discuss in a moment, but they're not always associated. And for instance, basic income, people are interested in basic income, not always necessarily thinking about ecological constraints or the potential role of the exponential technologies. Although there is a lot of awareness of what artificial intelligence may do to employment, so UBI is very much on the menu in Silicon Valley, where coming from artificial intelligence is more than conscious in the minds of many leaders there.
And can you sort of describe your and how you got involved with researching UBI specifically with this organization?
Okay, well, I think organization is really a virtual organization, but decades ago, perhaps in part influenced by a good friend of mine, it was Herman Daly, who is perhaps the father of steady-state economics and ecological economics. And for years I'd sort of had it in the back of my mind, and I worked in the World Bank, and I thought it was ridiculous the way our models were always saying, well, the best way to help a poor rich to grow. So it percolated down through me. I got very much involved with the internet and saw this as a technological kind of Schumpeterian way that we could serve to move to further development in countries that need it. But always had in the back of my mind, and having done a bunch of books and other work on that area, I decided to devote my intellectual energies to this, and that's how I got started. The relationship with UBI was that I don't think it's very easy to call upon reducing consumption of people who haven't got enough by any definition of the word. And we have many official percentage of GDP or what's enough to live by, but it seems to me that universal basic income is addressing this issue of what is and is of the technological trends that's going to make this important for not only economic sustainability, but social, political, and of course ecological sustainability.
And I think your group here is really interesting because of the emphasis on sufficiency. So I'm curious if you could describe what is the relationship there between efficiency and sustainability in the context of your research?
Well, you know, I think it has to do essentially with the moral and political aspects of achieving sustainability, in the last analysis, ecological sustainability. It just can't tell people who are starving, look, you got to cut back your consumption. And if you want their support for broader changes, we need to both change values and provide enough income to live for people who are increasingly not just manual labor, agricultural labor, or industrial, but increasingly the blue-collar professions are going to be displaced. And many students of this, of which I'm beginning to be, I can't say I've been in this field for a long time, I've been on the edges of it, now I'm reading a lot. I think that the idea that there'll always be more jobs created by this creative destruction that will replace the old jobs, all we need to do is find a way to transition people who are displaced. I think that the exponential rates of change involved in artificial intelligence and all those technologies that are related to Moore's law and the speed and cost of computation, if we don't, I think their jobs are going to be destroyed faster than they can be replaced. So UBI is a method of separating work, labor, paid remuneration from enough to live on. And then there's a lot of debate going on. Are people going to sit back and with their six packs and watch video or play video games and not do anything else? There are lots of other options: more spiritual activity, more care of the family, more intellectual exploration, and taking jobs. Well, I think the UBI people are more than aware of the arguments in favor of UBI. Of course, they're still being debated, but they're being debated ever more widely. And Zuckerberg's been, you know, Facebook's founder, been touring the United States, and I don't know, perhaps some other countries. I saw an article in a Brazilian magazine yesterday saying that, you know, he was speaking at Harvard. And there are plenty of others in the Singularity University community, for example, who are interested. There's a seminar going on at Stanford University from which I got my doctorate, right in the heart of Silicon Valley. And Juliana Biranur is leading this work there, but she's found Are we still up?
And it seems like at some point, though, capacity. You mentioned that you know, we're gonna reach 10 billion people in the future. So, at one point, there's just too many people, and how do you deal with that in a way that ensures human rights, ensuring environmental sustainability? It seems like at some point something's got to give, and we can't keep increasing the population indefinitely.
Well, obviously, if you look at the fertility rate in developed countries, it's below replacement rate. In the U.S., it's just about replacement rate, actually fallen below in Brazil, and which has large areas of underdevelopment. Generally, fertility decline is correlated with things like clean water, mother's education, participation in the labor force. To a certain extent, I mean, this process of slowing down of fertility and population growth is well underway and going much faster than some expected. But there's still a bulge, a demographic bulge of people who have already been born and who are going to have children. Even though they have less children, the population will grow ever more slowly. The median forecast of the UN for 2050 is like, I think it was 9 or 10 billion, and by the end of the century, 11 billion, and probably falling after that. Of course, lots of things could interrupt that. But in Europe, many countries have a fertility rate on the order of 1.1, 1.3. Replacement rate is 2.1 women, live births per woman.
And do you think with, that size of global population, it's feasible to provide a basic standard for everyone, or do you think that it will exacerbate poverty in developing countries?
Well, I think it's really a political, much more than an economic issue. It obviously plays some strain, but that's where I think the promise of the exponential technologies and clean energy sources and replacement of scarcer resources by more easily accessible ones will help. So there is a general tendency amongst some in the sustainability world, the ecologically oriented people, to think, well, technology, and that's not going to solve anything. They'll just create more problems. I think that technology is part of the answer. So as we see right now, the cost of solar energy is falling rapidly. And in fact, if petroleum-based sources were not subsidized in many ways, it would be cheaper in many places. Battery storage is coming along, and people like Elon Musk, are pushing that ahead. So I think that the technological changes are fundamental, but we also need a change of values. And that's we had a group in the World Bank in which Herman Daly and Ismail Sarajeldin, two members of our group, both who were very prominent in their fields, we called it values in development. Now, if you look at what's happened, for example, 20 years ago, or 30 maybe, smoking was being promoted by every conceivable means. The tobacco industry had their hands into all the media, the advertising business. It was, to me, sexy and powerful to be smoking. Today we find smokers shivering outside the buildings in the winter, and maybe they won't even be permitted to smoke there. That's a big change in a couple of decades. And partly we can speculate on the reason it came about: better medical knowledge, understanding by the insurance companies and medical systems that this was a very destructive process. Well, in today's world, into what we're looking at here, if the media were used to there's got enough of basic resources necessary for a decent existence that would be a good thing. But that involves thinking a lot about the role of commercial propaganda and freeing up some resources to promote these more, let's say, sustainable values.
So I was reading through your About page, and it gives a lot of different things for your pillars of different research areas. And I'm wondering if you could explain a little bit more in depth what overlap in research between UBI and these other things that you're researching, such as automation, those technological advances are.
I put it like this. First of all, sufficiency is necessary in order to provide the moral and political support for restraining consumption of the rich. sustainability, economic, political, social, and ecological, is necessary for survival of a population that'll level off at about 11 billion by the end of the century. Exponential technologies, including artificial intelligence, offer potential to substitute for limited resources, provide cleaner energy, and reduce the need for physical labor. But they also tend to concentrate income and wealth. So UBI is necessary to provide economic, social, and political sustainability. And to finance UBI, you're going to need other public policies, particularly fiscal policies, to have a more progressive tax system. At present, the tendency in the United States, at least, is a concentration of income and wealth is resulting in basically the purchase of the political system to further reduce the taxes on the rich and cut programs for the poor. This is the exact opposite direction from what we have to go.
Well, so politically...
On this subject, I recommend two books. One is called Dark Money by and the other is called Capitalism for the Many, Not the Few. The first is by Jane Meyer, and the second by Robert Reich. And they give a very good description of what's happened in the United States. Probably there's similar trends in some of the other countries, and perhaps the UK, I don't know.
And so in that type of political environment, how do you go about discussing and promoting UBI in a way that's effective politically?
Well, that's probably one of the most important issues that we hope people will address. Some people are looking at it, I guess, but we hope, for instance, in the book we're thinking about, we probably have sections on each of these 8 areas that we have identified that are shown on the site and so forth. Sufficiency4Sustainability.org. And we would ask each author to make sure that he addressed at least 2 of those 8 subjects, which would promote, in fact, this cross-fertilization and realization. In Portuguese, we say conscientização, to raise consciousness of the links between these areas. And that would be a start. Then hopefully more people would be appearing in other media and in their own organizations. We might promote more cross-fertilization between the many much larger and more important some specialized networks like BN. That's my interest in BN, and I'll be going to the Congress in Lisbon and hoping to strengthen links with them.
And specifically, do you see a relationship, or do you think there should be a larger emphasis on the relationship between UBI and sustainable development?
I think that's absolutely fundamental. And that brings together 2 important groups, those who are sort of social justice oriented and those that are ecologically oriented. And they're both increasingly important constituencies, but we need those tools as well. And tools have, study of how value change takes place and how to promote it, and the directing some of the work on the so forth. They often see there's no limits whatsoever, and I think that there are limits, at least on this planet, and that we need to address them. But it's a political and a task, shall we say, a task of changing values and creating a broader constituency and understanding of the relationships between these fields.
So do you think that there's a chance that UBI could contribute to a mindset that's perhaps more consumerist or materialist, and at the same time, do you think that there is a way to frame the UBI in a mindset that along the ecological end of the spectrum?
Well, I mean, that's a question. obviously, you know, sufficiency when there are people who haven't got sufficiency or in danger of losing it due to the loss of employment, that is going to mean more consumption than otherwise take place. But there's so many opportunities in new technologies to reduce the amount of material throughput or dirty energy production that I certainly don't think at all. I mean, I think the sufficiency argument absolutely has to be addressed if we're going to deal with the ecological issues in a way that's politically feasible. You can't just, as it's often been accused, well, all these environmentalists, they're telling us to stop growing, but look, I've got mine, Jack, is what you guys are saying, the hell with us. And we have to say we are concerned about enough for those who haven't got enough. And they will find ways to reduce the consumption or make it a cleaner, less material intensive form of consumption in order to stay within the constraints posed by, you know, a closed system, the earth, and the steady state economics concerns.
So do you have any other thoughts about what you think should be the main emphasis for the UBI movement going forward? What should we be researching, talking about?
Well, I shouldn't try to dictate something that's a very powerful movement, but if I, from what I know now, could whisper in the ears of people, I'd say reach out to those other areas and show the links, because I think that'll strengthen the UBI movement and it'll strengthen the other movements. And that's really where I'm putting my energies and seeking to mobilize others that are in a position of credibility. That's why we say thought leaders are important, but people who are known and respected in their own fields and therefore carry more weight when they speak even on other subjects. And that's, some of them are already conscious of these connections, but maybe not all 8 areas. So it's a political and consciousness raising task that is important now. I think we will have the technologies necessary to deal with this, but we haven't got the political conditions to make it happen.
I really appreciate you talking with me today, and I hope that we can find another time to maybe talk more in depth about the relationship here between all these different areas. So thank you again, Dr. Peter Knight.
Thank you very much, Tyler. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and I'll be happy to talk again. It seems my wife has arrived with a friend. Okay, bye-bye.
Perfect timing. Bye-bye.